Animals have the natural instincts to survive on their own. With human interaction, this is dramatically changing. More often, humans are keeping wild animals as pets to keep up with the latest trend. This interferes with the way they survive, and as a result, they become dependent on the care humans give. Animals are a key part of the ecosystem, as we are as reliant on them as they are to us. They help sustain the environment, and keeping their natural instincts is vital to staying native. Jazz is a macaw and is subject to humans treating her in a non-ethical way, which has both damaged her physically and mentally. She is now in the recovery stage prior to her experiences. So can you start off by telling us what happened to that?
Okay, so this is Jazz. She came to us as a rescue because she has quite a long story, bless her. She was originally born in captivity and hand-reared. She went straight into a pet shop from that, where she sort of spent the majority of her life up to this point. So it was a quite stressful situation for her. There's lots of people like coming and going, quite a noisy environment for her. Sort of growing up, she didn't have consistent handling or anything like that. After a few years, she was bought by a sort of vet that specialised in exotic animals, which allowed her to sort of get a lot more tamer, a lot more calmer. She was handled a lot more. Unfortunately, a few years later, this lady had a baby, and because parrots tend to bond with one or two people at a time, the baby came along and Jazz became very jealous. So she couldn't stay in the house she was in, which is how we have her now.
Do you think this is showing the key signs of human interference with the way animals behave?
Yeah, potentially, because she was hand-reared. She's a complete imprint on humans. She doesn't really understand that she's actually a parrot. So it does have a massive factor in their natural behaviour. Purely the fact that it's not a natural process, hand rearing, and there's many different pros and cons for it. But yeah, I believe it does have a massive factor in her behaviour.
How do you think animals' behaviour has been influenced by human interaction in the wild?
Okay, so human behaviour can have a really big influence on animal behaviour. For example, overfishing in the sea can cause big changes to the biodiversity. If you kind of take out some of the species from the food chain, other species will kind of suffer, and changes like that are mainly caused by humans. Also, you've got kind of deforestation and habitat changes, which will cause changes in the kind of social interactions which animals have, so that's quite a big one as well.
Do you think domesticated animals could survive on their own without the interference of humans?
Okay, so when an animal's been in captivity for quite a long time, it can really affect their behaviour when they're put back into the wild, so they wouldn't have the same kind of reaction to predators and to kind of social interactions. It would be quite different to what they would experience if they had been raised in the wild, so it can sometimes kind of inhibit their survival when they're put back out into the wild.
This is the African helmeted turtle. It inhabits the marshes and creeks of both subtropical and tropical Africa. They are omnivores, meaning they eat both meat and plants, but are largely carnivorous, feeding on worms, snails, small fish and amphibians, as well as aquatic plants. They can live up to 20 years and grow up to 20 centimetres long. The species does not have a hinged plastron, which is the lower shell, so do not have the ability to cover their head and front limbs, meaning they are more vulnerable to predators, unlike other species of turtles where they use their shell as protection. Tortoises are shielded from protection by a shell like all other types of this species. The average tortoise can grow to 6 to 8 centimetres long. A Hermann's tortoise can weigh 95 to 160 grams, while the African spurred tortoise can weigh up to 43 kilograms. The world's oldest turtle is 183 years old, called Jonathan. He is 45 inches long and can stand up to 2 feet tall. He was already 50 years old when he was brought to St Helens as a gift to the governor from the Seychelles in the late 19th century.
Simple question, how do animals, how do they react when being handled?
These guys are handled really often, so they are quite calm when it comes to handling. Depending on the handler will depend on their sort of reaction to handling. If they're confident and they know what they're doing, they're using correct methods, they're quite calm, and they do sort of throw their legs a little bit just because it's the unsteadiness of being lifted up off the ground.
What sort of food do they eat?
These guys are on a massive selection when it comes to their dietary needs, because they're quite specific when it comes to these species of tortoises. So these guys are fed a large proportion of their diet is weeds that we collect off the estate. So there'll be things like dandelions, we've got goosegrass, hazel, there'll be some willow, bramble, plantain, clover, those sorts of things that are really quite specific in the minerals that they need.
What is the major difference to how they react out in the wild or how they react here?
In terms of sort of their natural behaviour, these guys, I think, when it comes to sort of like predatory evasion, they don't understand that there is something that they could potentially attack them or anything like that. And they're a little bit more docile and they're a little bit more confident, whereas in the wild they tend to hide away, and these guys will like sort of come out every day for us.
With the bigger tortoises, are they more intimidated by them?
These little guys don't tend to really notice the big ones coming and going. The only time there'll be any sort of competition between them is when it comes to food. But there'll be no aggression or anything like that. It's literally just who can get to the food quickest and eat the most.
And can you explain their natural, their behaviour throughout the day?
So these guys, again, they come in at 9 o'clock and they'll be given a visual health check to make sure everybody's okay. Then we will be feeding and watering them between 9 and 11, and that's when they'll be given like key things like if they need bathing that day, they'll be bathed, they'll be weighed weekly, and then they'll be in here all day until about 4 or 5 o'clock when we come back and do their afternoon feeds and waters. These guys will be used sort of throughout the day, sporadically for lessons and things like that.
Do they ever interact with other species of animals?
Yeah, these guys are in with plated lizards, and again, when it only really comes into play, they'll interact at feeding time. It'll be sort of slight competition over food, but nothing major.
How do animals communicate, and do they understand each other? This is in terms of the same species.
Okay, so if it's communicating within a species, it kind of depends on the social needs of that animal. So kind of really social species like apes and dolphins and even bees, they've kind of evolved to communicate with each other, so they can kind of use like alarm calling and kind of displaying behaviours to communicate. Whereas kind of solitary animals don't really need to communicate, they kind of only need to differentiate between predator and prey to survive, so it's kind of different depending on the needs of that particular species.
How do other animals interact with each other? Different
species? Okay, yeah, so if an animal is kind of trying to identify another animal, it will kind of base it purely on its survival needs. So for example, an insect would maybe have like a coloration or a certain behaviour to kind of deter predators and that kind of thing, whereas obviously a predator would need to be able to interact with the prey to be able to feed, so it's kind of based on that really.
Do animals in the wild have any other behaviour traits other than the natural survival instincts?
So it's not an easy question to answer actually, because we're not completely sure whether that's the case or not. Some species kind of that are more social and developed, like dolphins and apes, have shown signs that they might have culture and also behaviours that they don't necessarily need to survive, like kind of playing with each other and communicating in ways that they don't necessarily need to.
How does this differ with domesticated animals?
So some domesticated species such as dogs and sometimes cats as well, when they kind of play with you and play with each other, that's all part of their kind of learning how to hunt and things like that, because they still have that built into them that they don't necessarily need it to survive. So that would be an example of that.
Do animals have emotions?
So in terms of negative emotions, animals kind of have been shown that they can show signs of depression, especially in captivity if they're kind of performing behaviours that wouldn't usually be performed naturally. They can kind of show signs of kind of self-neglect and self-harm when they don't kind of have enough mental stimulation and enough contact with other animals. They can kind of start showing quite negative behaviours. And also with more positive emotions, it's quite hard to kind of measure that, because I mean, how do you measure happiness? But yeah, usually if an animal's behaving naturally, that's kind of how we'd say that yes, they're mentally stable, yes, they're content and happy.
Are animals self-aware?
So it's not completely known whether animals are self-aware. One of the main tests that has been done for this is kind of to put markers onto the animal and see whether they respond to the markers when a mirror is put in front of them. And in dolphins, they've actually been shown to kind of look to where the markers are and kind of try and remove them and things like that. And then the same with apes as well. They've been shown to kind of react to themselves in a mirror. It's not completely known whether they're just reacting because it's a novel thing that they're seeing, or whether they're actually self-aware and thinking, oh, that's part of me, or whether they're just like, oh, what's that? So it's quite hard to measure, but there's kind of signs of it in the more complex species.
Do animals have morality?
That's also quite hard to answer. I would say in cases of domesticated animals, if an animal's been trained to kind of not do something, they kind of will make sure that they're out of view, and if they do the behaviour, and that's been shown in some dogs, if they know they're doing something naughty, then they kind of try and do it out of sight. Likewise, in kind of big groups of monkeys where there's a leader who kind of punishes negative behaviour, it's been shown that when the animal is aware that they're not in direct sight of vision with the leader, they perform behaviours that are kind of considered wrong and naughty. There's also penguins, which they collect rocks as like a display to the females, and it's been shown that they steal other penguins' rocks. So they know that it's bad and they do it out of sight, but whether they kind of still do the behaviour, so it's not really been shown that they kind of prohibit that when they know it's wrong.
Okay. Do animals need emotional connection and attention to thrive and survive?
Need this more than others. Kind of animals which don't have a lot of social interaction and kind of experience sort of abuse and neglect will behave differently to those who've kind of had a lot of attention and social interaction. So yeah, it can really cause a lot of abnormal behaviour if there's a lack of communication in a social species such as dogs and cats and kind of domesticated animals. Yeah.
What kind of pets do you have and how do they respond to you?
I have 2 cats. They're both quite different. One's really shy and quite timid, and the other's kind of this big fat cat that kind of comes and demands attention constantly. So yeah, there is quite a lot of difference between the two. It kind of depends whether they want something or not. So yeah, when they're hungry or they want affection and attention, they kind of behave differently to when they want to be left alone. So yeah, quite different.
The behaviour of animals depends on the species and their surroundings. This can then change when humans interfere with their upbringing. Every animal has a distinct behaviour pattern. Human interference with wild animals have a bigger effect on their natural instinct traits. However, after years of domesticating animals into pets, they now have become used to relying on human support. Although many humans are now trying to domesticate wild animals, changing their natural instincts, meaning future generations to come will believe they're considered normal pets, when in fact this shouldn't be the case, all because people want to keep up with modern trends. Charities are set up to protect animals and keep them in their natural environment. Support these animals by donating to the charities because they are as much part of the world as you are.